What did you look for when you went looking for an unbacked horse? Many of us know what we look for in a riding horse, but it's difficult when they haven't been started yet.
Rest is so important when it comes to progress. This podcast is brought to you by Redwings Horse Sanctuary and Equilibrium Products. Hello everybody and welcome to episode 2 of This Equestrian Life. Hello Rhiannon, how are you? How's it going?
Hello. Yeah, well, it's episode 2 of season 2, but technically if you're reading this it will be episode 12.
Oh god.
Producer Amy will get us in line for that. But I'm really excited for today's episode, young horses.
Me too.
We're going to talk about
we have lots
everything
to talk
from
about.
babies like foals all the way up to well, I don't know, when does a young horse stop being a young horse? The existential question. We were thinking sort of 7, 8, weren't we?
Yeah, because when they kind of finish growing, which is a scary
Yes.
thought when you see how much young horses do these days in modern sport. There's a few things I want to talk about with that actually, because we've got some cool things going on in the industry now where things are actually starting to slightly change, and I'm so here for it.
Yeah,
tell me about your week. You go first.
Well, I feel like I've mentioned camp 3 weeks in a row now because we've just recorded them quite close together and I still haven't been. But we're leaving in 2 days, so I'm really looking forward to that. I'm a bit nervous.
It's actually Wednesday. We're actually recording this on a Wednesday, guys. So it's actually Happy Wednesday for us.
Yeah, it is. Happy Wednesday for you as well. Yeah, I'm a bit nervous, if I'm being really honest, just about the atmosphere and the jumping, because we haven't done loads of fillers and stuff, and I just don't know if he'll find that difficult. So I'm a bit nervous there, but I'm quite excited. There's a couple of people that follow me, and I posted about the camp and they were like, oh, I'm going to that camp, and it turns out one of them's going to be in the same group. So that's cool, because then I kind of feel like I know someone, even though I don't know this person. I will, and that'll be nice.
Yeah, and social media friends are real friends, because look at us.
I know. Who'd have thought it?
Who'd have thought it?
So that's been good. And then the other thing is there's been lots of talk about dressage because of... What was that competition called?
What? What are we talking about?
Oh, the one that Lottie Fry won. Oh, I feel like I should know this.
I haven't been paying enough attention. Was it a World Cup or something?
FEI World Cup, yeah. Oof, I should have known that. So there was a lot of talk about, obviously, not great at the top of the sport, but also some really nice examples. There was I wish I knew the rider now, but there was a grey horse who was doing a really high level movement. I think it might have been the Piaffe. It was either the Piaffe or the Passage, one or the other. I can't remember.
Well,
and
Passage is moving. Passage is moving. Piaffe is on the spot.
I think he was Piaffing in that case. He was on the spot. But his she barely had any rein contact. His little ears were forward. He looked genuinely relaxed and sort of quite happy. And someone put it in a comment section on a post about I think it was an American rider who they weren't super impressed with, and I was like, oh, that's really nice to see. So there's that. And I also wanted to read this post that I saw from M Dressage World, who I don't know loads about, but I've seen a couple of their posts pop up on my feed, and I really liked this one. So they said, it's so easy to fall into the comparison trap in dressage, watching another rider's polished movements, seeing a horse that floats across the arena and wondering if you're doing enough. But here's the truth. Dressage isn't about being a better rider than somebody else. It's about building something better with your horse, ride by ride. Ask yourself, did you ride with more feel today? Did your horse stay more relaxed? Did you connect even just a little more than yesterday? That's progress. That's winning. Your horse doesn't need to move like somebody else's. They need you to believe in them and in your journey together. So celebrate the small wins, the quiet improvements, the moments no one else sees but that you and your horse feel. Keep riding forward. You've got this. And then it just says, tag a fellow rider who needs to hear this. Let's lift each other up. But I just was like, oh, that feels so in line with everything we talk about.
I love that. That's really nice actually, isn't it? Stay in your lane kind of vibe. Think about your own process. Where are you? Don't compare, that kind of thing. That's lovely. I love that. Going back to the World Cup thing, there's a barefoot horse competing at the top, the highest level at the moment.
Is there?
And
Do you know what
and it's really joyous to watch, really soft, really elastic, all of those things that you were talking about. And I saw an interesting post this week where somebody was comparing a snaffle bridle and a double bridle in terms of pressure.
I read that, the research. Yeah.
And it was really interesting, the findings. But what I found, what I struggle with in that is I'm thinking why we're really hung up on pressure and like what is good and that side of it. But then there's still such structure around like removing things. Like you have to compete in a certain type of bridle past a certain level still in certain circumstances. You have to wear spurs past a certain point. You know, they're bringing in, like, they brought in a whip rule in British show jumping where you basically can't use a stick. You can carry one, but you can't really use it without getting pulled up. And then yet there's still this stuff going on at the top level where it's like, well, you can't do it unless you have this stuff. And I just find it all quite conflicting and a bit confusing and a bit like...
Well, it's hard, isn't it? Because
it's complicated,
dressage,
isn't it?
It is, and dressage sits so different from like eventing and, well, in my opinion, eventing and show jumping, in that the reason that people advocate for double bridles, spurs, etc. is like it's supposed to be a tiny, very specific movement, and you can only, quote unquote, only achieve that, or it's easier to achieve that with these tools. But to your point, I think the problem is like, okay, that even if that's true, they've been abused in a way that makes that actually a really horrible experience for the horse. And you were talking about your warm-up the other day, and somebody else I know who rides at a high level was talking about a warm-up they were in, and they were talking about a very specific rider, and they were like, I just can't believe this person's allowed to even ride, like the way that they treat their horses. They just completely lost sight of why they're doing the thing they're doing. And it just, I read a really interesting post the other day, if I can find it I'll put it in the show notes, about what, like, forgetting the reason that you're working with the horse, and that for some people the horse becomes an emotional punching bag for their things that they feel inadequate about. And and it's just, anyway, this is taking a dark turn, sorry. Well,
no, but I think it's really important to be able to discuss like the kind of the other side of the stuff, like, because obviously you and I are both on the same, very much the same side of it with our horses. You know, we really are horse advocates. I'm very much horse first, sport second, and I think that the lines are so blurred that it's complicated. And when money becomes involved at the top of the sport, like we've talked about before, it becomes very difficult for people to be able not to, you know, to have to advocate for the horse first, because the reality of that is really expensive. It's really complicated, and you probably end up riding less or being able to achieve less if you're really going at the horse's speed. And I'm not saying it's not possible to ride at the top of the sport in a kind way, but it's a damn sight harder than if you take advantage of the horse. And that is,
well, also this is
complicated.
Sorry. Well, people have said this, that, you know, when they were calling out that grey horse that I spoke about who looked nice, that they weren't being rewarded with the marks. And actually a couple of years ago, Lewis Carrier was at the London International, and I remember he put a post on social media. A lot of people really commended him for his ride, and he put a post between the second and third day, I think it was, saying, like, I was told that if I wanted higher marks, then I needed to... I don't know the exact phrase he used, but I'm pulling back my hand.
The thing was he was riding in a more traditionally classical dressage way, so his horse sometimes was a bit in front of the vertical, meaning its nose wasn't totally on the vertical line. And what he was saying was I'm not going to change the way I ride my horse. You know, for just because to conform. And I saw a post the other day, and it said, if we really need to change the sport, it's in the hands of the judges. They are the ones that need to change this. You know, the younger judges that are coming through, we collectively need to make a decision. We're going to stop rewarding the overbent, the hyperflexion, the whatever it might be. And actually this brings us so well onto Tristan Tucker, Mr. TRT. This is how I am trained in the groundwork, is the TRT, through my coach Claire Gallimore. She trained with him, she's trained me. I'm actually having some lessons with her next week, and I'm so excited. She doesn't live in the UK anymore, she lives in the US, and so she's coming back, and I've managed to get 2 lessons, and I'm so excited. But Tristan has brought out a new series in Europe, and what he is doing is, it is like a young horse competition. That's why it's relevant for this topic today.
Carl Hester spoke about this, actually. I think he did an opinion piece for Horse and Hound on this. Anyway, carry on.
Well, I think people are going to get a short, sharp shock when they go to try and, you know, when the professionally produced young horses go to do this, because there's a section that is in hand.
Well,
if there is a section in hand where they walk around the arena, and they I believe have to go around or towards something scary like a flag, for example, and then they have to mount in a slow and you're judged on these things, like how soft does the horse walk around the arena, how softly do they stand at the mounting block. Then you ride them on a long rein, and like the 4-year-old test will have some show of like medium steps, and then the 5-year-old test will have a small amount of leg yield, basically. But you aren't punished if you change your course, so you're not penalised if you need to ride an extra circle. You're not punished if you use your voice. And I think this all the time, like, why can't I use my voice? What is, if you can train your horse with no bridle on, no spurs on, and just using your voice and your seat, well, bloody clap for you on number 32, because I just find that so bizarre. Like this, it's like you need this more stuff. If you can do it with less, I think you should get a higher mark. If you can do it without even knowing that you're doing it, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was talking about this with my coach today, and she was like, the only other side of that is that, I agree, like voice is always better than like, it's kicking
force.
The ribs or whatever, and force, yeah, but there's still a pressure to the voice for some horses, like a rider just going and like, grrr, and like, there's voice and then there's voice,
Of course, yes, yeah.
Which is,
go on,
can you
get
imagine?
down the centre line. That might be slightly different. Sorry about your ears.
Terrorising.
Yeah, the judge is there in the judge's box, like holding onto their pen, like shitting themselves that someone's going to come and knock them out. No, I'm
did
talking
actually,
like, which is the noise I make to make my horses slow down, which is really cool. And I had this amazing liberty session with one of my horses this week, Little Belle, and I've never done anything loose with her in the arena. And then I did one session before, and I did it again this week. I don't understand what's going on, but like her and I, it's like symmetry. I think I'm going to go and teach her how to do the party tricks. We're going to go to the circus. It's very nice. Cute. Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about something before we get into the podcast about and like my week as such. But I had, after our conversation last week about the stress bucket, I wanted to draw back to that because Bev, the lady that I'm working with, Unwind Your Mind and Body, she said something super interesting in our session this week. 2 things actually. One, when you cry, you are releasing cortisol. So like you are literally leaking cortisol out of yourself when you're crying. So let the tears come, guys. If you feel the need to cry, let them out. It's really important. And what I've noticed recently is sometimes when I'm doing a lot of yawning in the sessions, when I'm like releasing and yawning and relaxing and all of those things, my eyes water so much. And I'm always like, why are my eyes watering? And she said, well, it's because cortisol's coming out. And I'm there like, get it out of me. Yeah, get the cortisol out. This is great. The other thing that
my
she
eyes
said,
water really a lot when I yawn as well. Sorry, that was
carry on. Oh, good. It's good. Let the cortisol leak out. Imagine myself like a sponge just seeping cortisol. The other thing that she said, which was really nice, is if you imagine we all have a stress bucket, and I have come to learn that my nervous system is actually pretty dysregulated. That's why I suffer with anxiety a lot. I suffer with feelings of not really feeling like safe or comfortable in certain situations. That doing the nerve exercises that we've been doing, so like checking in with my body, doing the big breaths like we've spoken about, stretching my neck, massaging my neck, my ears, whatever, all of the different things, is every time I do that during the day, it's like poking a hole in the stress bucket. Like, so then some stress can fall out and the holes may get blocked up again by other things. But if you can keep poking holes in your stress bucket all the time, then you can start to reduce the amount that's in the bucket. And I thought that was such a nice way of looking at it in terms of our horses as well. Like, what things can you do with your horse throughout the day to knock a hole in their stress bucket? Like the groundwork that I practice, for example. You know, went to the show with Zora the other day. What could I have done in that circumstance to help knock a few holes in her stress bucket? Maybe walked, had a little break, took turning hind leg, moved her body in a certain way. Like, how can we knock holes in our stress bucket for our horses to help them? And I guess the bigger ways is also by like making sure that their needs are met and their management is good and all of those things. But I just thought it was a really lovely way of looking at it. And today, I'm going to talk about this on Instagram because I think it's super relevant, but I wanted to say it here as well. I got bitten by a pony today, quite badly, right? I was interacting with her and she's really, really angry. And she turned around and she bit me on the hand. She put both my baby finger and my ring finger in her mouth. When I say I didn't react, there was I didn't even blink differently. I didn't flinch. I didn't startle. Nothing happened in my body. And I think this is what it must feel like to be really regulated. Because
I mean, that's wild, Miri, that you didn't even...
I know.
Harley accidentally bit me the other day because I was giving him a piece of hay and I got my fingers in the way and I was like, ah!
Yeah.
And he immediately let go. And that was it. That was all that happened. But
right. So but you know how sometimes we really feel really like jarred by things? And she's not, there's no such thing as a nasty horse. She's not trying to be horrible to me, but that was just her response in that moment. She was responding to me touching her body, and that was her reaction. And I was so proud of not having a single reaction in my body. And that's not going to be all the time, and that's not, you know, perfect world and all of those things. But for me, it felt like, okay, I can be that person, you know. And I'm not saying we should, you know, be a punching bag for our horse, but sometimes in these moments when I'm working with these really dysregulated horses, it is important that I am very passive in that. So yeah, that was just really interesting, and I wanted to kind of bring that back to last week because it felt like a really relevant kind of like progression, I suppose.
Yeah, I love
right,
that.
should we get into this week's topic? I mean, I'm looking forward to this.
Yes. Yeah, me too. So we thought we would talk about... So basically, last season, a couple of episodes were particularly popular. One of them was like buying and selling and things, and we were sort of like, what would happen if we took it back a few years? And so we're gonna start talking about foals, baby horses, backing, and then go into 4, 5, 6-year-olds, etc. I don't have much interaction with foals, but I will just tell this one story to kick us off. When I was looking for what was now Harley, there's a stud in Kent that also does retirement livery, and I'd looked there for Woody and sort of considered them, and they have these really beautiful skewbald and piebald foals from their stallion and their mares. And they're kind of like, I don't know what breed they are, but they're quite chunky looking. And anyway, when I was looking, it was all becoming a bit, you know, just couldn't find anything that I liked.
Demoralising is the word you're going for.
Demoralising, it was demoralising. And this foal popped up on the feed and he was so beautiful. I mean, beautiful. And at the time I was still quite heartbroken. And I remember thinking like, I wonder if I just get a foal and just stick out of riding for 4 years and then just pick it up again. And then sat down with myself and thought, that's a terrible idea. You don't know anything about foals. But I really thought about it because I was like, oh, you know, they can live out for a few years, then they can go to Miri to be backed, and then they can come to me and Hannah. It'll be perfect. and then I was like, it'll be a lot cheaper. And then I thought, it won't be a lot cheaper, they will it? Because by the time you've paid for 4 years of their life, yeah. But anyway, that was my very short, sharp non-introduction to foals. Yeah.
So I've had a fair amount of interaction with foals, and the reason that we wanted to talk about this, guys, is because sometimes I think like it can seem like a romantic idea, right, to have a young horse. And I will be honest and say I do my fair share of mending people buying foals, and it's sometimes glorious, and people do an amazing job, and they raise a really well-rounded, lovely, educated, knowledgeable young horse. And then sometimes they turn up and they've got a head collar on and it doesn't look like the head collar's been taken off for a very long time, and you say, oh, this seems 4, by the way, by this point, it seems quite like unhandled. Oh yes, I really like my young horses to be really like unhandled. And I'm thinking, with unhandled comes no knowledge, and with no knowledge comes no confidence. And then you've got a can as big as a horse full of worms that you have to try to undo. And I think, so I've had, you know, I don't necessarily think I should go into the ins and outs of my unsuccessful breeding program that I attempted, but essentially I bred a foal, and it only lived to 36 hours. Foals can be born with sepsis, where their immune system is basically non-existent, and she was born very small. I think she was essentially premature, should have been shipped off to a vet hospital within hours. Wasn't given that advice. That didn't happen. Here I go, leaking some cortisol potentially. And I had this lovely romantic idea, basically, and I don't want to be too doom and gloom about this, but I had a very romantic idea that, as someone who had had a mare for a long time, I'd had her for 10 years, I thought, you know, she'd proven herself, she's a really very good mare, she jumped 140s, she was unbelievable, I would have a foal from her. And the reality of it is that breeding horses, or breeding any animal, I think is actually really complicated and not something to be taken lightly. And you hear a lot of people saying, oh, you know, I bought a mare and then one day I'll have a foal. And some people have a great time, and they do manage, and they have a lovely time. And then sometimes people are really unlucky, like myself. And one of my old boss, actually, because I really beat myself up badly about this. I felt completely responsible. I felt like I'd completely let everything down, and I should have seen this and that and the other. And she came up to me at a show, and she said to me, you know, you could have taken that foal to the vet within half an hour and you'd have had the same outcome, but you might have spent £8,000 trying to save them, because she said sometimes life is not meant to be. And I really struggled with it for a very long time. The grief was really serious. I had a really bad year that year. It was pretty diabolical. And I think it's just important to remember that those studs, the big studs that are breeding, you know, the numbers that they are breeding and the numbers that will be good are so much fewer than you'd think. And I don't know, I just think it's just not something to be taken lightly, I think, breeding.
And even for those big studs, you know, things still go really wrong, even when they're so knowledgeable and they've done it for so many years. One of my best friends is a vet tech, and their veterinary practice specialises in studs and breeding of horses. And even then, they still have awful things happen. Like, you know, I remember
really high rate.
Growing up. Yeah, it's not the same, obviously, but growing up on the farm with Dad, like, the sheep and the lambing every year, it's almost a given. It's, what's the phrase? If you have livestock, you have dead stock, which when we think about our horses, we don't like to think about them as livestock because they're so much more, but it's still the same thing. And there is an element to which I think people think foal easier, cheaper, because they are cheaper in the sense that they might be cheaper on the price tag, but they're not. You've still got to find all the years of them growing up. Someone who I think has done a really wonderful job, actually, or is doing a wonderful job, and it's really interesting to watch, is BL Horsemanship, who Miri and I both know. Well, I'll put her details in the show notes, but she had a I think he was 18 months old, is that right?
Yeah.
He was not in a great state, and anyway, she's had this wonderful balance with him of, like, he lives out all year round pretty much, but she brings him in and she started, like, he's barefoot, she does a bit of target training with him, she does a bit of groundwork with him, so he's kind of doing little pieces even as an unbacked horse, so he's not doing too much for his body, but I'm super curious to see where he will go with that kind of, you know, its start.
It's really interesting. Remy. So little Remy, absolute darling.
So cute.
You know, Hayley came and helped me with some positive stuff with Blondie.
Did she?
Watched it on YouTube. Yeah, I've got a whole video on it.
Of course she did. I do remember that. Yes.
So that brings us. That's actually really relevant. So one of the questions that I think we wanted to discuss today was, like, when do you start training? And I was hoping it was a question you might ask me, but I'll ask it to myself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I feel bad
It's
now.
okay. No, not at all. But so positive story. I got given a foal. And she was given to me at 5 days old because her mummy died. Her mum died of a prolapse, sadly. And so my mare adopted her through some magical science. And maybe we'll talk about breeding properly one day. But anyway, with a specialist who knows what they're talking about, because I definitely am not that. So this lovely little foal turned up, 5 days old, and she showed me what a 5-day-old foal should look like, because my foal never looked like her. She never looked like she was full of the life that Dee Dee brought. And so I started training, I did some air quotes there, at this point when she arrived. Now, that seems wild, right? Foals, you don't handle them, like you just leave them, da-da-da-da-da. I don't actually believe that is true, because a foal is not like a baby. No, you don't train a baby. That's not what you do. Babies are useless at survival. They would not survive without their mums. And foals wouldn't, but they're far better because they get up within half an hour and they have to run away if they need to from whatever predator. So what that means is their survival instinct is really, really strong right from the outset. And this carries through. This is a rule through all of horses. Their survival instinct is the strongest thing that they have. So what, as humans, in the human environment, is good and important to do is to start to shape that instinct right from the outset. So, for example, when I first started interacting with Dee Dee, I would just place my hands on her chest and ask her to take a step backwards away from me, like physically, a little bit of pressure on her chest, and I just asked her to take one step back. So she started to understand about me slightly moving her body. And then the same thing when I stood next to her, I very slightly just gently pushed her body ever so slightly, so she learnt to step away from me. And that was it. That was all I did. She wore a halter when she arrived, so that was a step that was done for me as such, because she'd been being bucket fed.
Did she have to travel on her own? Or did she travel with a...
No, they just brought her on her own.
That's so sad.
I know. I can't. She turned up in like an Equitrek lorry and she was just stood in the partition. Like, not in the partition, there was no partition. She was just stood there on her own, like, honestly, it was a pretty devastating part of my life. I can't deny it. I wouldn't do it again. I don't think I don't know if I'd breed again. I don't know. It's
Sorry,
brutal.
I didn't mean to take that path.
No, it's okay. Yeah, it was sad. It is sad. It was really sad. But she lives with her mummy now. She still lives with her mum in the field. Girl. So she was, even though her spine was not meant. Anyway, that's another story. We will talk about that later in this episode when we get to age 5. But anyway, so the important takeaway here is, like, I'm not trying to give you training advice necessarily, but the important thing to understand is, if you don't shape their behaviour or shape the way that they interact with you, I hate the word behaviour, it kind of feels like, oh, you must behave, and I don't mean that. Yeah. You know what I mean? They will make it up for themselves. And the problem is with that is then we want them to respond in a good way to us. So, you know, you see people like manhandling them a lot, and it was really interesting when Dee Dee was around. I had an experience with another foal at a similar time, and she didn't do things the way I did them. And then the first visit with the farrier was so stressful. I will never forget it. The farrier, like, a lot of wrestling was going on. And I was there, like, Dee Dee was having her feet trimmed. And she was just stood there, little darling, like, okay, this is what we do. And so the more you can educate them in a consistent, kind, gentle, small way to help shape that growth, the better. Because then when I got to 3 years old, I've skipped forward, but we will go backwards, I promise. When I got to 3 years old, handling, like, backing Dee Dee was just a complete non-event. Because she had so much knowledge. Exactly. You know, the horses that I struggle with are the ones that don't get educated at all and then are expected to become educated just at the drop of a hat, you know? So that is Yeah, and in those formative years, what is, I guess the balance is between doing enough and not doing too much. I want to take a moment to talk about one of our sponsors of the podcast this week, which is Redwings Horse Sanctuary. Now, Redwings do a number of wonderful things, and one of the things that Redwings does that is a magical thing in the horse world is they are a huge advocate for the Strangles Awareness Week, and that is coming up at the beginning of May. Now, Strangles Awareness Week is very important. Strangles is a horrible thing that spreads around the equine community every now and then, and it is something that we can all play our part in understanding and knowing more about. Redwings encourages us to follow a protocol called BEST. So what we can do is we are doing the best for our horses. What that means is we are boosting immunity with the Strangles vaccine, which is new actually, and something that maybe we can learn a bit more about as we talk about them a bit more, because I actually don't know a huge amount about the vaccine. So this is really exciting that we have got something that we can now be all proactively doing to prevent strangles. You can engage with trusted information, so talking to your vet, understanding about Strangles protocol on your yard. You can make sure that if you're moving to a new place or you are going competing, that you are maybe separating from unfamiliar horses. So you can operate with an isolation protocol to help in these sort of situations, and you can be routinely taking your horse's temperature. And this is really important and a very interesting one. So often a really good way of telling whether your horse is carrying the Strangles virus is by taking their temperature on a regular basis. A horse with the Strangles virus will have a raised temperature, and if that is the case, then it's a case of isolation and a huge shift in biosecurity protocol. Redwings do a huge amount, so make sure you give them a follow, and Strangles Awareness Week is the first week of May, so give them a follow prior to that so you can make sure that you are getting all of the information you need so you can be Strangles aware.
Also, we had it on good authority last week that we were on the radio in the Redwings office last week, which just made me so happy. So we're shouting out to you, Redwings crew. I feel like a DJ. And also to the Redwings social team for their excellent TikToks.
And we're saying hi to the donkeys because we can't wait to meet you. I'm going to talk about the donkeys every week.
I know, I'm so excited. We might even do an on-the-road podcast where we just take the audio with us. You just hear the donkeys with us. How fun would that be?
Speaking of donkeys, this is ridiculous, and this actually happened today. This is such a sidebar. I was teaching a woman on Zoom, and I suddenly heard this like sound, and I was like, what was that noise? I'm not joking when I say it sounded like something at Jurassic Park. And she was like, oh, we have a mule. And every now and then when I was teaching this lesson, there was just this sound in the background, and I had to just really concentrate. But yeah, mules and donkeys are a complete different thing to a horse. They're just wonderful. Did you know that they're not flight animals? They're fight animals.
Love that. We should all be more mule. Anyway, back to the podcast. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you is, like, some people will buy a yearling or a foal and this shaping behaviour then becomes important for them, but a lot of people, I think probably more popular to buy a horse unbacked around the 3-ish year mark, because people don't want to wait, they don't want to spend the money on the the kind of formative years. So you've been in that position because you bought Zora as a 3-year-old.
I did.
And you had one that you'd kind of shaped at home and one that you hadn't, which is super interesting. What did you look for when you went looking for an unbacked horse? Like, because I know what I looked for in a 5-year-old when I was riding, and I think many of us know what we look for in a riding horse, but it's difficult when they haven't been started yet. So what do you look for?
Well, that actually all happened in the same year, which is interesting. A terrible year that was shaped by a good bit at the end by buying Zora. What do you look for in a young horse that is unbacked? So you have to go on a sense of, like, so for me it was a lot about like talent at the time. That was one thing that I was really looking for, like, what is it that I want that horse to be able to do. Now, I actually bought Zora with the intention of selling her. Let's all laugh together. Because I was never ever going to sell her. That was basically so that I could con my fiance into believing that I was going to sell her.
Does he ever said this to you? Has he ever just been like, Miri, please?
So many times. He's like, you know, you did say you were going to sell Zora. I'm like, yeah. And then I got given another horse and he was like, this is a real problem. I'm like, yeah, but the business is fine. So it's fine.
You know, when I bought Harley, my coach was like, we can buy a 5-year-old. She says it to all her liveries. She's like, we can buy a 5-year-old, but you must be prepared that he may not be the same horse at 7 and he may not be the horse for you and that you may have to sell him. And I was like, yeah, I can agree. And in the back of my head, I was like, there's no way I'm going to know him for like 5 days and be obsessed.
You're like saying yes, but shaking your head at the same time. Like, yes, of course. I absolutely believe you. No, absolutely not. So anyway, Zora's still here. She's 9. But I looked for talent in the first instance. I looked for good X-rays was one of the things. Turns out
what did you X-ray?
Well, she came with X-rays, which was my issue, because they had very carefully taken some X-rays of her hind fetlocks that didn't show her actually having some small chips in her fetlocks. Turns out nearly every horse in that sale had something not good. So something called OCD is a osteochondrosis. If I've got that wrong, I'm going to cut it out, Amy. And what it is basically like a small fragment of bone flakes off the joint and then hangs about in the joint capsule and sometimes causes a problem. Doesn't always, not always a problem.
If it moves, isn't it?
Not necessarily, but it's more that if it's in the wrong place.
Oh, right, of course.
So they can like migrate and then become in the wrong place, but sometimes they don't. And you can have horses with chips in joints that never ever experience a problem, and then you can have horses with chips in joints that do. But she had back X-rays; they were all good. Neck, feet, hocks, all the normal joints. So I looked for that. And then for me, so it was quite cool. We had this opportunity to go and meet the horses before the sale. So I bought her in an auction, which is a bit of a wild ride. That video has had a lot of views on YouTube if you want to go and watch it. It was very exciting. I was literally like, we were bidding on her. George was bidding and I was like shitting my pants. Because by this point I was desperate to buy this horse and there was somebody else bidding. So we got the opportunity to go and see the horses before. And she was really sweet in her stable. Like there were some of them that were really big as well. I wanted a nice little horse. And she's only about 16 hands now, 16.1 at a push. And so she was quite small.
Well,
I am 5 foot,
like,
5'5" and like eight and a half stone or something. And she was little, so I didn't think she'd be very popular because not that many people want to buy a small horse. And she was tiny then. She was like a little, you could have put her through a letterbox. She was tiny, weeny, little narrow girl. And I saw her out the stable and I saw her move and she moved like really, really well. And I was thinking, yeah, this horse. And so she's half bred show jumping, half bred dressage. Nice. And I got the all clear from my vet, judging on the x-rays that we had, that things were good. And so those were the things that I was looking for. So it was kind of like conformationally the right type for me. She looked very kind. She was sweet. She was quite like anxious at the time. I mean, she was literally being fed pure oats and like a handful of hay. And then
you were like, us anxious girls gotta stick together.
Yeah, literally.
Can I say that? Actually?
Yeah, you can say that. That's fine. Because I attract anxious things all the time. Dogs. I've got an anxious dog these days. Blondie, she's quite anxious. Belle, very anxious. And that was my deciding factor. I think if I was giving some advice to somebody who was maybe going to do this process, please make sure you have a professional that is going to help you before you start. Because it is not to be taken lightly. These formative years are so important for the rest of their lives. I always say to people, it is so much more straightforward to back or start an unhandled, untouched young horse than one that somebody has tried to back. Handling different, but like I'd rather a wild one than one that somebody has tried and failed to back. Because those ones, that trauma is deep for them. Sometimes it's not that complicated, but more often than not, it's a big deal undoing that.
Well, I also remember, for like an average rider, I remember a professional rider saying to me when I was looking for my second horse, we were looking at different ages, and they were like, you're so much better off buying a 6-year-old than you are a 4-year-old. She was like, and it was quite a brutal thing to say, but I understood where she was coming from. They were like, you know, by 6, the ones that are going to break because of, you know, their bodies before they've been backed will probably have broken. She was like, you don't know that at 4. I mean, she was like high level dressage, and I think so she was thinking with the brain of like some people who push their horses quite early, quite hard. And I just thought that was quite interesting, that like, you know, everything's unproven at that age. And even going back to Woody, for example, with his hock arthritis and his joints being not great, that my vet, she said that probably was formed as being a foal in just born outside, and like there's nothing you could have done. So there's an element to which, you know, you don't know that when they're unbacked, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's where having, you know, understanding about conformation and understanding about how their body moves and works. So like, for example, Zora has a slightly not straight front leg. One of them is a bit, and so it means that she doesn't land totally flat, which is another reason why I keep her barefoot. I mean, I'm a barefoot fan, but it means that there's less concussive force added by not having a shoe. If I had a shoe and it was trying to make the foot land straight, her leg would, somewhere else in her body, would take the stress of that foot not landing how it's naturally designed to land. But it's all things like that I think are super important at 3 years old. And I think, you know, if you are somebody who is keen to do that, then yes, have professional help, but also be conscious of where that, like how that horse has been living its life and what you're going to need to give that horse to help it continue to live its life. I have a consultation service that I run through my website, and I talk to a lot of people about young horses. And so commonly, and actually I recorded a patron podcast yesterday where I answered loads of questions on my Patreon. It's like I kind of run it like a forum almost, like people can ask me questions and then I record them as a podcast. And I had a load of questions about young horses, and most of the time it was like, you know, questions like, oh, they're really nippy or they're a bit complicated. And my first question in return is, what is their management? Because young horses need to be young horses, right? And often people say, oh, how should young horses live? And I believe that they should live as naturally as they possibly can. So I don't actually believe that herds of young horses, all 2-year-olds, all 3-year-olds, is a very good idea. I think they should be mixed generationally, because the older ones train the young ones for you. It's perfect.
On that, what is your perspective on mixed herds? Because I know you do have geldings on you. I don't know why I suddenly thought you just got a barn full of mares, but I know your mares go out together. I don't know how your geldings turn out, but I know some people are like, you should have mixed herds so that they get a balance of the sexes and different interactions so that it doesn't become weird. What's your opinion on that?
I think it's very situational, because, as in situationally specific, because if you have a large group of horses that live together all the time, then it's, I think, manageable to intermingle them. But if you have any amount of change, then it does become harder to have a mixed group, because the dynamic will change all the time. And they've done a lot of studying of this, you know, that do horses like have a hierarchy, basically? And yes, but it's always changing. So it's not always like, oh, that's the matriarch, like that's the female that is the leader. That's not always the case. It will shift depending on, I don't know actually what it depends upon, but it will always be shifting. So I think, you know, integrating horses together is actually something really difficult, because unless they've grown up together, it can be quite complicated when you've got a lot of like reintegration of new horses. We're really careful with integration on our yard, and I don't mix genders other than the horses that live out all the time. We have a couple of young geldings and then 4 mares, and if when we bring one of the geldings in, I will then put the other gelding with the other mares. just to, you know, because it makes logical sense, but they would live together all the time. So I think it's horses for courses, as always in these situations, and no one size fits all, I guess. And you do see, you know, mares are complicated and geldings are more simplified because they don't have hormone fluctuation in the same way that meldings, Jesus, in the same way that mares do. So they're far more straightforward. Like you can this isn't a hard and fast rule, and please don't take this as advice, but like geldings, you can pretty much put them in the field together and be like, all right, mate, and then they just carry on eating. Whereas you put two mares in the field together, if you did that without integrating them, and they'll be like, oh my God, who's that? I can't believe she's in my field. I'm going to kill her. So, and that can go on for quite a long time. So it is complicated, mixed groups. But in terms of young horses with it, like when I weaned my young horses, so I bred two, bred inverted commas, and I had an older mare called Nanette. She's passed away now. She was retired, and she was a really sweet old thing. She was so gentle, but she was gentle when she needed to be, and she said, that's my food, when she needed to. And I think that we called her Nanny Nanette because she was such a darling. And that, I think, is like a really important dynamic to have, is having older horses and younger horses. And I think that really helps to promote a healthy herd and a healthy, like a socialised young horse. And this is what I was going to say. Like if you've got a really nippy young horse, let them go nip another young horse. There's this thing called bitey face. You'll have seen it.
Yes.
And guarantee it, young geldings particularly, they need to go and do that with others. They do this funny like mawing thing where they're like fighty, bitey, kind of mouthing at each other and nipping each other and biting each other's legs a bit and kind of doing weird like fighty things with their heads. Have you ever seen a giraffe have an argument with another giraffe?
No.
It's hilarious. They like whap each other with their heads.
Oh, with their necks. Yes, I have seen this.
It's quite a similar sort of vibe. So I think that's one of my best pieces of advice. If you do have a young horse, is please let them be a young horse. They've got to go to play school and be stupid bastards with the other stupid bastards. There's a balance to be had. Should we move on to the backing, the starting bit?
That was going to be what I was going to say next. Let's do it.
Do you want to? What do you want me to? Do you want to ask me? What do you want to go? I don't know. I don't want to just like spiel off loads of information.
No. I mean, I feel like I can't really come in too early on this because I was going to say this now. I think as an everyday rider, there was definitely a choice of the next horse that I bought, which was like, how early am I going to go? Do I get a really nice 8-year-old or 10-year-old or a da-da-da? And I did kind of think, I could definitely enjoy a 5-year-old, but 4 felt too young, too green for my ability, and maybe not really fair for a 4-year-old to be managing me when I'm not, you know.
That is so important to say. It didn't feel fair. And can you go into that a bit more, please?
Well, I think, and actually, we're sort of jumping forward a bit, but even with Harley being a 5-year-old, one of the things that I was looking for when I tried him was a horse who was quite forgiving. And that's not to say that a horse is just going to allow you to be a terrible rider, but I needed a horse who wasn't going to completely freak out and get really anxious if I suddenly, my balance shifted, or I put my leg on when I wasn't supposed to, or something, you know? Like,
or you didn't see a great stride to a fence, or
exactly,
whatever.
Which, when I tried him, my God, some of the strides, I can't believe they even sold him to me, to be honest, because in front of the show jumper, it was like cross poles, and I was just nervous, and the strides were awful, and Harley was just amazing. But anyway, and so I think going even younger with a horse who doesn't really know yet what aids mean and is still trying to figure out the world for themselves, they need a real holding hand. And even with Harley, like, my coach rode him for like the first 3 months once a week, sometimes more, just to make sure that he was also getting the right learning influence. Whereas I think a younger horse, it wouldn't really be fair to put an average rider when they're still trying. It's like trying to teach someone a language with someone who doesn't also speak that language as their first language, so you're sort of bumbling through together hoping that you'll get a good result.
There is a phrase that is pretty harsh, but it's the blind leading the blind.
Well, yeah, exactly.
That is not a good place to start. Oh, we'll learn together. Yes, but there has to be some foundational establishment.
Because even now,
exactly. Sorry. No, go on. I think you're gonna say what I was gonna say.
Well, even now, Harley and I, for example, we've got to the point where we have a good foundation, and we're looking at the canter transition, for example, because it's a little bit messy. And my coach is like, well, that's okay. She was like, this is the bit where we sharpen you both up. She was like, you don't know any other way for asking for a canter transition than the way that you've been taught. And he doesn't know that there is a easier, quicker way to go off your leg because he's never been taught. And so we have to teach you both together. And we can do that because we have a foundation of trust and knowledge. But you don't know what you don't know, and you can't teach a horse if you don't know what you're doing.
I also think that there's something that you are very, very good at being, and that is admitting when you don't have the answer and saying help. And that is what is so important. If you are an amateur and you have a young horse and you are a capable rider like you are, Rhi, but you are maybe not, you've never produced a young horse before, it's being able to say, I don't know the answer to that. I need some help. And that is what is going to, help you flourish through that process. And that is what I think, unfortunately, sometimes doesn't happen, because on yards, the right support isn't there and it gets a bit complicated, and somebody said, oh, you should be doing this or you should be doing that. And so then that kind of humbleness gets lost, I think.
So let's talk about backing then, because I don't want to put you on the spot, because I know you do this as part of your business.
I do enjoy being put on the spot. It helps.
Okay, well, let's do that then. I've got a young horse. I've bought them. They're unbacked. I'm pretty sure I bought the right one. They've had the right integration and all the rest of it. I need to send them to a professional to be backed, and then hopefully carry on some training with a professional. But there are so many people out there. The prices really vary. People say they can do stuff in 4 weeks and they seem pretty cheap, but then somebody else wants to do it this way and that way, and someone's using the word breaking, and I don't know if I like that terminology. How do I pick a professional, Miri? I've just given you a few red rags to a bull, because I know a few of those.
There are my eyes.
I'm just winding her up. Whoop, 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 yeah.
If somebody tells you they can back a horse in a certain amount of time, run fast in the opposite direction and say thanks, bye. There is no such. It's not a bicycle. It doesn't take a certain amount of time to pump up the tyres. You cannot, guarantee anything. And I always say that to people. I generally say I work to a sort of 8 to 12 week minimum. And that's the wording. It's the minimum part. It's going to take a minimum of X amount of time, not a maximum. If somebody's offering a backing package, run. Run for the hills. It's such an individual process with every single horse, and there is a protocol that I follow. So I have a structure that I go through with each horse. So we go through the groundwork patterns, we get to an understanding of movement and pressure from the ground. Then we work through being able to handle themselves under pressure in terms of human pressure. So it's not desensitizing, it's not flooding. You can learn about it more on my Patreon. I show the whole process on there. Then we start to introduce things like moving to the mounting block, learning how to be restful at the mounting block. We teach the tacking up process. We go through every step of the tacking up process to make sure the horse is comfortable with every little thing that I am going to ask them when I get to the backing process. So actually, when horses come to be backed with me, the actual riding part is 20%. The rest of it is foundational knowledge, giving the horse confidence in the human environment, helping show them how to move their body in a positive way so that sets them up for their future, so that they understand about how to seek the rein, how to be soft through their top line, how to carry their body around the outside of the arena without being held there. We don't use training aids. We don't chase, or I'm not lunged on them. Everything is done at the horse's pace. I said this before, but I'm known for being very slow at backing horses. And I think to myself, good. Because I don't want to be famed for being fast at something or riding through a problem or anything like that, because I don't believe that means that the horse is being put at the top of the list.
Well, it's a false economy as well, isn't it? Fast now, falls apart later, you know? Fast, cheap.
That? Fast, cheap, good?
Fast, cheap. Yep, that triangle. You can't have all three. Fast and cheap, yes. Good and fast, not cheap, etc. Although in this case we're saying no fast, but yes.
Yeah. And I think that is often overlooked. And I have had a lot of young horses come to me that have been backed, you know, attempted to be backed by other people. And those are always the ones that take much more time, because it's like a ladder, right? If you've got a ladder, and this is the same as with any training situation, my job is to first of all work out what the bottom rung looks like on that ladder. Like, what is that most basic foundational step? And then for me, even if I'm restarting a pony or a horse, I go through that process. And it might be that I walk the first 4 steps pretty fast. First week, potentially, I'm at the tacking up stage. It's quite rare, but I'm at the kind of next bit as such. And then you have to work out where the wobbly steps are. Now, with the backing process, you are building that ladder. You are building each rung at one at a time until you get to the point of the riding or whatever it is the goal is. And if at some point these other places who can profess to do it in 4 weeks, they've just gone to step 10. They've sacked off the whole half of the ladder. And then step 10 is wobbly, it's holy, it's gappy, it's not confident. Your foot falls through. Step 10, you fall right back to the bottom, and there is no knowledge. There is only fear. And everything is then tied to that broken step higher up. It's the only thing that horse can think about is that broken bit in the ladder. And then my job is then to restart all the way from the bottom while there's this fear at the top. It's quite a good way of looking at it, I think.
Yeah.
Quite a good analogy. So you want to do it right the first time.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of people, I have conversations with people a lot about, like, them saying, oh, you know, I'm really keen to back my own young horse. And I say, okay, I'm all for it if you have the right support and you're going to go at the right speed and you're confident that you can put in those foundational steps. And yeah, it's complicated, and it feels like an honour to be the person that gets the chance to do that, because I feel like I'm so proud of those young horses that I have started. I've started hundreds of young horses, and which is cool to say. And, you know, there's one thing that people always say when they ride one of the young horses that I have backed, is they always say, God, I feel so safe. And it's because the horse feels safe.
This is a great moment to thank Equilibrium Products, the other sponsor of our podcast. Now, one of my favourite products from Equilibrium are the Tri-Zone brushing boots. I will die on this hill. They are $39.99, so really great value. They're super stylish and they are usable for hacking, schooling, lunging, turnout, etc. They are incredibly lightweight, and as I've said to Miri and everybody else who will listen, they clean really well. That sounds weird.
She loves to clean a boot.
Love to clean a boot. But also, like, I can't put my boots in the washing machine. My partner would leave me. So I wash them on the yard and I scrub them, and then they have to dry, like, on the yard as well. And these are the only boots that will actually dry overnight because they're so lightweight. More important than that, they have been independently tested for breathability and protection, and we know, as we've all learned over the last few years and beyond, that tendons are very, very delicate, and that we have to be super careful about how warm our horses' legs get during exercise. So these boots are a great option if you need the protection, but you don't want to heat up your horse's tendons.
We use them for turnout all the time. So if we are introducing horses to each other, even if they don't wear shoes, these are my go-to turnout boots. We have the ones that they wrap all the way around the leg, so I think they're deemed the cross-country boot. And they're brilliant because, like you say, they're so lightweight, you can put them on and not worry about the legs heating up. They don't get sweaty and manky underneath. And they're just a super form of protection that means that, you know, you do get that little bit of reassurance that your horse is wearing something that's really going to look after their legs if they do end up in a tricky situation.
Yeah, it's lovely. And they come in a range of colours. I actually have the high-vis ones as well that sort of have like high-vis piping, because I recently learned from a study that actually moving parts of your horse's body, I'm swinging my hands back and forwards as if they're legs, is a really good way for them to be spotted by cars. And because Harley wears brushing boots year round, whatever he's doing, because he brushes in front, they are a really easy way for me to make him even more seen by using equipment that I'm already using. So to learn about equilibrium and the products that I've mentioned today, have a little look in the show notes. Back to the podcast. But that is such a lovely way of putting it in honour, because that's even how I feel with my now 6-year-old. Is like the thing that attracts people, I think, to getting a young horse often is this idea that you're gonna build something together for the long term. Not always, but I think for the kind of one horse owner, that you're going to like put these foundations in place for this horse, and you're going to do the thing that you didn't get a chance to do maybe for a different horse. That can sometimes be brought into the mix, and you know, if only I'd had them earlier, I would have not done it this way. You know, I've had that myself. And there's that honour is really lovely, and I really like that framing of it, actually.
Yeah, I see it as a real privilege that people give me the opportunity to be the person. I've just recently backed 2 young horses for this lovely family, and they bred them themselves. And they were really nicely, pretty well-rounded pair of young horses. They've had good education with other young horses. They were not sheltered. Sometimes that's important, not having them, living in a tiny field with a Shetland is kind of not a very horse experience. And yeah, it's just lovely to set these young horses up. They were affected. They were just easy and sweet and kind, and the people gave them the time that they needed, and they've now got 2 lovely full-going 5-year-olds that are like really cool and have had great life experience. With this really interesting moment where I was hacking one of them for the very first time, and Aoife, my apprentice, she's 16 going 17 this year, and we were hacking down the road, and Luna, her name was, the young horse, she just walked past a load of fly tipping, and Aoife was like, God, that was really interesting. She just didn't even look at that. She just went straight past, no thought in her mind that it was a negative thing. And I said yes, because she's never had a negative perception of what like a pile of rubbish could be. You know, her mindset is of a curious nature towards something unknown, rather than scary thing, feel afraid. Because her nervous system has been regulated her life. She was well weaned, she had good handling, she was well handled, they were very kind and gentle with her, and she'd been like a lovely pet as such. And it's wonderful to have young horses. Backing young horses is one of the purest things that I think you can do, if you get the opportunity to do it in such in a way where they haven't had bad experience. It just doesn't feel unsafe at all. And like that experience I was talking about in last episode, that horse had some preconceived idea, something I had missed, something going on.
Yes,
there was a ladder
and
there was a step in that ladder that hadn't been securely fastened. They had lived quite a simplified life. They had actually lived with a Shetland, and this big horse, he needed to go and beat up another gelding, and the gelding beat him up back. Do you know what I mean? He needed to go and wrestle with something else to kind of get that part of his education that he didn't really have. So I wanted to mention something at this point, like, when is it the right time to back a young horse? It's a question I get a lot, and it comes back to that education point, I think, for me. So it depends on their body, but I do tend to like to start horses in their 3-year-old year, towards the end of it. Now, what I mean by start is start education. But what that may look like is different for every horse. So for example, we have 2, 3 turning 4-year-olds, they're 4-year-old this year, in my field, and we brought them in at the end of their 3-year-old year, and we started some education. So we went through the basic groundwork patterns, we introduced the term of pressure, again I did some air quotes, talking about plastic bags, flags, that kind of thing, so that they had an understanding of how to handle themselves in the human environment. We introduced the tack, we introduced some very basic long lining, put them back in the field. I could have spent some time leaning over them potentially at that point, or if their bodies were ready, sitting on board, moving their bodies. But I felt for both of them that the amount that they had learnt was enough for them to gain a good amount of knowledge. Now, they had both already done some basic handling and groundwork prior to that. And so, like, in the yearling year, 2-year-old year, I suggest doing some sessions of basic groundwork, moving their body in the right way, like I was talking about with the foals. Again, I've got this all laid out on my online platform. But it's that little bit of information in that point that I think is important, so that then it sets them up that then nothing becomes stressful. Nothing's like this huge thing. It's not like suddenly going to boarding school when you're 4 years old. And
let's go on.
Go on.
Well, I was going to say, let's talk about that 4-year-old year, because when I was thinking 5-year-old, 4-year-old, 6-year-old, where do I go? When I thought of a 4-year-old, I thought quite wobbly, sort of like finding their balance. And actually, I think the thing that steered me away from it was, one, being like, that horse is so early in their education, but two, being like, I don't know what I don't know what is right to expect of a 4-year-old, actually. I don't know what is the appropriate level of work, hacking versus going in the school, and actually, quote unquote, school. What does schooling look like? Because it's not going to look the way that it would look for an older horse. So what do you expect from your 4-year-olds?
Well, I think it comes down to how much understanding I now have of how well their body is developed, because actually their spine isn't even fully developed when they're 5. Like, their spine is finishing developing at 5 years old. So, if we are, what do we expect at that point? I think it's a lot to do with doing a small amount of work, like a consistent amount of work for a small amount of time. So my suggestion is generally doing 6 to 8 weeks of consistency, and that means maybe 4 days a week. One of those is a ridden day, one of those is a hacking day, which is obviously ridden, but one of those is in the school, one of them is on a hack, and 2 of them are from the ground. That's the kind of velocity that I would be going at for a period of time. So like I said, 6 to 8 weeks. It could be a month. It depends on the horse, and it depends on what you're, establishing with them. And then the rest of the time, I'd let them be a horse in the field. Well, their body is growing so much in that time. And I've really had interesting experiences with young horses where you would work with them for a period of time, and then you turn them away, and then they grow when you turn them away. And it's almost like their body was not growing because it was working on what you were teaching them. So you turn them in, put them in the field, and then their body goes blah, 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 and everything changes. Like, I was doing some hand gestures, like their back end comes up, then their shoulder comes up, to kind of join in. And so I don't really believe that a 4-year-old should be doing very much at all. I feel like it's a time for shaping their bodies. It's a time for showing them good feelings and encouraging them to be a well-rounded citizen. But it's not a time for achievement or shows, really. I don't feel.
Yeah, the spectrum is sort of quite big on that. There's some people who don't jump their horses until they're 6 because of the skeletal development. Other people, other industries that have a very different view on when to start horses.
Absolutely. And I think that's where some of the pressure comes from, right? Because you're like, oh, well, look at that horse doing a 4-year-old class, and it looks like a bloody pre-St. George, and you think, God, that's a bit, should I be doing that? And the answer is, you should be doing what feels right and what feels good with your horse. And I think you've struck this balance really well with Harley. And, because moving into like the 5-year-old side of things, like, did you set yourself goals, or did you chat with Hannah? Like, what were your sort of thoughts in that early stages with him?
Well, it was really interesting because I bought Harley. Technically, he was halfway through his 5-year-old year, and we'd done quite a lot of research onto him, and I had loads of videos of him, and I knew that what he'd done in his 4-year-old year, and who'd had him, and I had all these videos of him doing bits and pieces, and I knew that the guy who was selling him had also taken him show jumping because he would have been on the yard by himself. So they took him up to Shard, and he did a round of like 90 or something, British show jumping, and so instantly, sometimes I think as an owner, you're like, oh, well, you know, they've already done all this stuff, and maybe I should keep doing this stuff. But actually, I was like, there's no way I'm jumping my brand new horse around a 90. I don't even want to jump around a 90 now, and I've had him for like almost 2 years. But also, I'd already had conversations with Hannah just naturally where she'd been like, you know, you don't have to. I didn't jump my horse. She was I didn't jump my horse for the first 6 months, really. I just spent a lot of time laying the foundations, and when they're young, you know, you can just take your time. So I kind of already had it in my head that we were going to just see what happened for the first 6 months. First young horse, I wanted to make sure that I gave him time to settle, and that I gave myself time to get settled into riding a different type of horse. And also, because he's an Irish draft, he's bigger, and these bigger breeds tend to grow slower. And what I found really interesting was we had the saddler out literally every 2 months, every 2 to 3 months still do actually. And every time his shoulders would go out, in, up, down. And she was like, you just never know what you're going to get because they're changing so much. And I don't think you can have goals, like material goals, that early, because your horse doesn't really know what's going on. And one week they'll feel good, and then another week they're growing and they don't feel so good. And you start to, like, I started to recognise when he was growing, because he would get kind of weird in his body and just feel a bit off. And he would get like super hungry, and like he's not really an Aggie horse, and he would be like at the door like, feed me. And you'd be like, it's okay, like this is, you know, he's not like that. So you'd start to learn these patterns, and so you have to back off a bit. And that was okay. That was long-winded. I don't know.
No, absolutely. One of the things I often say to people if you're buying a young horse or have a young horse is you have to be prepared to ride a new one every 2 weeks.
Yeah. Oh god, yeah. Still, even now, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, because they change so much, and the way what we're doing with them will change. The way the seasons affect them will change, and it's definitely a lot. There was a question that I thought was really interesting, and it was, what would you change in the first year of owning him if you were given your time again? Oh, if you would change anything.
I actually think I did a pretty good job of like checking where we were. Like, I remember in his 5-year-old year, I took him out to a few shows in a row, or a couple of shows, and he just like didn't cope very well. Like, and not terribly, but like he had a couple of moments in each one. And I could have carried on going out and being like, oh, we'll just work through it. But I didn't. I took him back home and we worked on stuff at home. And I brought him back out in his 6-year-old year, and he's so much better. So I'm actually quite proud of how I have managed his first year, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just wondered. It's an interesting topic of conversation.
Yeah, but I think to your point around what you looked for in Zora, there's something interesting about what to look for when you're trying a 5-year-old. And like, as an everyday rider, for me, like, obviously I wanted a bit of talent. Like, I didn't need, you know, Vellegro or whatever, but I did want to see paces that I thought were good, like a good walk, because I wanted to do dressage. So I was like, good walk, what does he look like when he moves, etc. I wanted to feel that like the basic aids were there. He didn't have to feel perfectly straight or perfectly balanced. He didn't even have to feel like he was in the right place, because some people train them differently and that can all be changed. He didn't even know how to stretch.
You mean in terms of an outline?
Yeah, so when I tried him, he was, and actually you can see clips on my YouTube and stuff, he was very up and quite short in his neck. He didn't know how to stretch, and the guy was like, yeah, he doesn't know how to stretch. And that's okay. And the other thing was like attitudinally, he was just lovely. Like, in the stable, very sweet, very nice. They were very sweet and nice with him, which I think is a really nice sign. And like, I remember him getting a bit flustered when I asked for a canter transition, and I just brought him back to walk and kind of gave him a little stroke, and I was like, it's okay, we'll just try again. And he just really sweet. And then I missed the strides jumping, and he just didn't care. And then I took him down the road, which they often say, do you want to hack them out? And I took him down the road by myself, and I turned that horse around about 4 times. on this road just to see.
That's a big ask. Just wanted to see. That was a big ask.
It is a big ask. It was a big ask. I was like, went down the road, turned, walked a bit, turned again, walked a bit, turned again, and he just didn't do anything.
Could they see you?
No, because I was like up the road.
Yeah, because I think if someone was trying my horse and they were doing that, I'd be like, excuse me, pal, what you...
I didn't literally like turn him round on a sixpence, but I like walked up the road a bit and then I'd turn him and I'd stop and like I don't know, I just wanted to see if he did anything and he didn't care.
Yeah,
but I also wouldn't have done that if I felt like he was already on edge, you know.
Right. That feeling of safety was there, so you felt like you could push the boundary a bit.
Exactly, but I think the attitude was a really big thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Because we could build on everything else, and the fact that he'd been out and done some stuff, that was cool. Because I was like, well, he's coped really well with that, clearly, and that's nice that he's seen a little bit of the world without having done too much, which is also a balance I think you have to strike it when they're 5 or 6.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's something I want to touch on, and that is often, people often question turning young horses away. And I think it's horses for courses in this moment. For me, it suits me well to do something with a young horse and then turn them away. But as a professional rider, it feels different because I don't feel worried about the starting again part. Because when you start again, you do have to be willing to put your foot on the first rung of the ladder again, like the basic, the really foundational part. Whereas for someone like yourself, my suggestion with a young horse would be actually giving them a fortnight of rest is so powerful. Like, just stopping for 2 weeks, leave them in the same routine. They go out, you don't suddenly like sack them off in a field and take their rugs off, but you just do the same thing. And actually probably would be a great thing to do with Harley at some point is, you say, actually, I'm really busy at work for the next 2 weeks. I've done this camp or whatever it might be. I'm going to give him just 2 weeks. And it's so interesting to see what their bodies do. Rest is so important when it comes to progress. Like, that's the same in humans. If you don't rest enough, you won't progress. It's just a rule. And so, like, 2 days off a week next to each other is something that I really try and establish with my young horses. And it was really interesting, actually. I had a conversation with one of my clients this week. She only gave her pony a day off. And she started working with him, and she said he was just not interested and a bit finding it quite hard and kind of struggling a little bit on that after only 1 day off. And I do think that makes a massive difference for them because they don't get that processing time. And when you put 2 days together, the processing is far more. I don't know. It's just my experience, I suppose. It's not a hard and fast rule, but that's definitely something that I try to encourage people to do, is group the days off together rather than going like a day on, a day off. And actually that's something to mention in terms of training a young horse, is being consistent with the days one after another. If you're going to plan to do 3 days a week, for example, do them all next to each other. You will thank me later, because kind of like if you do 1 day and then a day and then 1 day off, it's kind of like if your kids went to school every other day, they wouldn't really get to a point where they would establish the learning or the point of education. It would be when they have, the consistency and then a gap. And I think there's actually studies done on kids now that show that they do more of their absorption away from their school than when they're actually at school as such. Like that's the important time afterwards when they're having their downtime. Food for thought, I guess.
I like that. Yeah, I like that. Well, I was going to say we can just open this up to questions and say if there's anything you think we didn't touch on that you'd be really interested in, you can let us know. Maybe we can do a little part 2. I think this was a good whistle-stop tour of the early stages.
Definitely.
In next week's episode, quite exciting, we're going to be joined by Lily Wilson, who is a holistic vet.
Yeah, so she's a holistic vet and a rehab specialist, and she has helped me a lot with my own horses, and she has a very different opinion on modern veterinary, basically. I don't want to kind of say it wrong, but next week is going to be a really interesting topic. I'm really looking forward to asking her some questions. We need to talk about that, actually. So we've got some questions to ask her. Oh, I've got one more thing that I must update you on. The zoo situation.
Oh, yeah, go on.
So, interesting. I actually don't think I'm going to end up going and training wild ponies at the zoo.
Oh.
I know, a bit sad, but it's because they want them to stay wild.
Oh, that's cute.
Which I get. It's cool, right? They want them to remain as wild as they can. And actually, they've trained them to do amazing things within staying wild. So, like, they don't put a head collar on them. They don't, like, catch them or groom them or pick out their feet. But they have, like, hard sand on their, like, loafing area. So they wear their own feet down. And then they have trained them that they can do, they can actually like do blood samples or vaccinations or anything like that, but without catching them. So actually, I think I should go and learn from them. Because it sounds amazing.
When I went to the US, I went to Via Nova, which is a ranch in the US that specialises in positive reinforcement. And they had, I mean, it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. I wish I'd vlogged it, actually. I think about it a lot. And they have a high-level dressage horse who they retrained in R+. But the reason I bring this up is because one of their handlers actually came from the kind of zoo world, because actually R+ is like very, very common with zoo and wild animals, because like you can't pressure a rhino into doing
or a
things.
Lion.
So they do. So R+ is very, very common. They've done it for years with like dolphins and stuff, which I know has its own problematic elements. But the fact that they're using R+ with wild ponies is like really cool. Really cool.
Yeah. So I actually think I should go and learn from them, because they sound like they could teach me how to give Blondie a vaccination. That'd be fantastic. Actually, Lily Wilson is the person to teach me, and she has an online needle shyness course, which we'll talk about. But it's implementing the steps, which I have not done, which is my own, you know. If you had asked me if I had any regrets for the first years of my horses, I would have had loads. But there we are. That's the way the cookie crumbles, as such. Well, this has been an interesting conversation, I think. And a kind of, like you say, like a door-opening whistle-stop moment for maybe something more so in the future. As always, guys, we love to hear from you. Leave us a review. If you can hit subscribe, it means a lot and helps us out. And we'll see you guys for next time, I guess.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening. Bye.